Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be wrapping up all of the books that I read in July. I think I have 10 books to talk to you guys about and do little mini reviews for. As ever, all of the books that I've spoken about will be linked down below in the description if you want to find out more, and if you want to keep up with my reading, all of my social media is linked down below, and you should definitely subscribe to this channel if you want to see more of my book reviews. I'm going to kick things off with the 2 books of non-fiction that I read this month, starting with Bookworm by Lucy Mangan, and this is her memoir of childhood reading. I had kind of mixed feelings on this book. I did absolutely love reading as a child, and I loved going to the library, and I loved reading basically anything I could get my hands on, but I think my reading childhood really differed from this author's because she read a lot of these like classic books, like these staples of children's literature throughout history, and I didn't really read a lot of those books. Things like Enid Blyton, stories like A Secret Garden, if I've read those books, I came to them as an adult reader rather than having read them as a child. The only chapter that I felt a huge amount of like a personal connection to the novel she was talking about were the Alice novels, and they're touched on actually very briefly in this book. In saying that, I did feel a certain nostalgia was conjured from this book, and being a child and reading things over and over again and reading anything you could get your hands on. What I will say is her experiences of childhood reading come across as very privileged, and you know, being able to read so many books as a child is an immense privilege. This is something that the author acknowledges, but I did find it at times a little bit irritating, but that's no fault of hers. Like, it's not her fault what her upbringing was like. I actually found this more interesting from kind of a publishing perspective and like the history of children's publishing than I did necessarily as a memoir of childhood reading. But if you are interested in kids books, in children's literature, I would still recommend this one. It was an enjoyable and easy read. Next I have Women Don't Owe You Pretty by Florence Given. This isn't necessarily a memoir, it's more of a kind of like guidebook to life. I haven't actually heard too many people talking about this one on BookTube, but so many people in sort of my wider friendship circles have been raving about this book, and I had such a fantastic reading experience with this because I went to a Waterstones, I bought it, I had some money off from my stamp card, and I literally read it like that day, which is something I never do. You know, books tend to sit on my TBR for a little while. This book takes you through a lot of struggles that women tend to face because of patriarchal structures. It looks at things like body image, it looks at friendships, it looks at dating. This book is also really intersectional. Although Florence is a white woman herself, she does acknowledge the struggles of women of colour. It has fantastic illustrations throughout that feature a range of different women and different body types. There were parts of this book that I kind of felt like I didn't necessarily need to read. A lot of it is kind of introduction to female empowerment, but I don't think it's ever a problem to have a refresher on those things. And there were also a lot of really stark realities outlined in this book that I think I really needed to hear. I think there's something for every woman in this book. I underlined so many things in it of just things that I really needed to be reminded of. There is a bit of like tough love in this book, and things aren't sugar-coated, which I think is the friend we need a lot of the time. There are definitely sections of this book that I will be coming back to, and I really, really highly recommend it. Moving on to the fiction for grown-ups, I read The Shelf by Helly Acton. This is a contemporary women's fiction book that the description of it just sounds so up my street. In this book we follow Amy, who is at that point in her life where she's kind of waiting for her boyfriend to propose to her. She thinks she is being whisked away on this grand holiday, and this has to be the time that he's going to propose to her. But that is not what happens. What happens is Amy finds herself on a reality show where she is dumped on TV, and she has the choice of whether she wants to participate in this show where she's competing with other women in the same position, doing a bunch of trials and challenges, trying to gain popularity with the public in order to be voted the winner of this show, The Keeper. I love dating reality shows, like I just do. I just love them. I love them with a very critical lens though, and I think if there is a Love Island shaped hole in your life at the moment, I would really recommend this book. The women who are participating in this competition kind of flip it on its head and use it as a vehicle to raise a lot of feminist issues, and there are lots of different kinds of women that have different approaches to relationships depicted in this book, and I really appreciated that. Nothing about the feminism in this book is hugely nuanced. I wouldn't say it's anything groundbreaking, but that's not what it sets out to be, I don't think. It's just so much fun. I found myself really not wanting to put this book down. And yeah, if you are looking for something that's just really, really enjoyable and fun and not too serious, I'd really recommend this. Next, I read Scenes of a Graphic Nature by Caroline O'Donoghue. If you've seen my best books of the year so far video, you will know that her earlier novel, Promising Young Women, was my favourite book of the year so far. So I was really excited to read her second novel, and it did not disappoint. I loved this book so much. So the setup for this book is kind of complicated to explain. We are following the friendship between two young women who are in the film industry. One of them has a career that is really starting to take off, and the other one, our main character, her career really hasn't gone how she planned for it to go. What she has been working on for years is the story of her father's childhood. Her father grew up on an island off the coast of Ireland, and he was the only survivor of a disaster in a school. The teacher died, all of the kids died. It really devastated this entire community. The girls go to Cork, where they debut the film at this film festival, and there she meets someone who highlights the inconsistencies in her dad's story. The two girls decide to go visit the place where her father grew up and start digging around and trying to find out what actually happened. While they're doing that, there are also a number of challenges and tensions in their friendship, and our main character begins to understand her sense of Irishness as someone who has always kind of said she's Irish because her dad is Irish, but this is actually the first time she's ever been to Ireland. And I think the way the author depicted the nuances of that experience was really, really well done. I think the whole way she depicted like really small town Ireland was done superbly, and there were just so many other elements to this novel that I truly, truly loved. For example, our main character is gay, and I didn't know that going into this book. Why don't people tell me this? I need to know if it's gay, because I will just automatically love it more if it's gay. This book also touches on the fact that it is way more common than people would like to think that young women work in the sex industry to support themselves in young womanhood. There's just so much going on in this book that I absolutely adored. I just want to thrust all of this author's work into everyone's hands. I love her books so much. Next, I read Supporting Cast by Kit DeWall. This is a short story collection that takes a look at the lives of the supporting cast from Kit DeWall's novels. So I think it's just My Name is Leon and The Trick to Time, and I've only read My Name is Leon, and I did recognise some of the characters that are depicted in this short story collection, despite it being quite a few years since I read that book, and I've not read The Trick to Time, so I didn't really know who any of those characters are, but the stories do still hold up. They are the kind of short stories I love, where it is just a very brief glimpse into someone's life. I would say that if you have read both of her novels and you've read them recently, I think you would probably get more out of this collection, just because you will recognise who the people are quicker. The stories do hold up, they still do like function as full narratives in themselves, but I do just think you would get more out of them. Moving on to some fiction for younger readers, I read Patina by Jason Reynolds. This is the second book in the Track series, but you don't need to read these books in order. I haven't read the first one. The novels are all linked together because they follow one member of a track team, but they are their own individual stories and standalone. And in this book we follow Patina, or Patty as she is called by those who know her. Not only do we follow this girl's experiences of being a girl doing sport, but there is so much in this book about her family and home life and the difficulties and adversities she faces. Patty's mother has had her legs amputated, and there does seem to be this thread throughout the novel of Patty running because her mother can't. Like, she says she has her mother's legs. Patty and her younger sister are cared for by their grandmother and her grandmother's partner. Patty's own father died when she was very young, and the kind of awkward social moments where people are talking about their parents or asking about her father were depicted really sensitively in this book. I really empathized with Patty's need to like prove herself to be the best, and I would really like to read the other books in this series. I didn't absolutely love this book, but I think that's just because I'm not the target audience of this book, so the writing wasn't my absolute favourite, but again, it's not written for me. I would really like to read the other books in this series. I also read If You Come Softly by Jacqueline Woodson, and this book broke my heart. This book follows the teenage romance between Jeremiah, who is black, and Ellie, who is white and Jewish. They kind of fall in love in that naive, innocent way you do when you're a teenager, where everything is a new experience, and because it's so new, it is just so heightened. They don't see how being from different races should matter in their relationship, but they are also acutely aware that it matters to other people. There's one really interesting scene in this book where Ellie is on the phone to her sister, who is queer, who is in a relationship with a woman, and as soon as she finds out that Ellie is interested in a boy who is black, her tone kind of shifts a little bit. She's not necessarily being overtly racist, but she just didn't expect her sister to be interested in a black guy. And Ellie very astutely makes the observation that a lot of the things her sister is saying to her are things that their mother said when she came out. The ending of this book is really heartbreaking, and unfortunately, while it was written in 1998, a lot of the themes in this book are still extremely relevant. It's a really quick read, it's a really short book, but it's one that really packs an emotional punch. I also read Blood Moon by Lucy Cuthieu, and this is a YA book that is told in verse, and I read it so quickly. I read it in just a couple of hours one night. I kind of started reading it on a bit of a whim because I just wanted something quick, and I kind of want to reread it because of that, because I feel like I devoured it and I needed more time to kind of sit with the themes a little bit. So in this book we follow Frankie, who has her first sexual experience while she's on her period. Herself and the boy she experienced this with don't really see it as a big deal that she was on her period. They just kind of embraced it. And that element of positivity was something that I loved about this book. But when people at her school end up finding out that Frankie had this experience, and I do think it's really interesting to see the differences in how she is treated and her male partner were treated. When people at her school find out, she's really judged, she's really shamed, and this book really tries to challenge those ways that she is judged. One of the things that I thought was really fascinating about this book was that it demonstrated how cruel teenagers can be, but also the very specific way that teenage girls can be very cruel. One of the major plot points of this book is Frankie falling out with her best friend, and neither of these girls are perfect. Both of these girls are horrible to each other at points, they are judgmental of each other at points, they do not support each other properly at points, but they are both still depicted with sympathy as young women who are learning to navigate the world. And ultimately, you come to realize that the way these girls are behaving in negative ways is a result of the patriarchal structures that surround them. The ending of this book is super positive, and I think if you're a fan of the show Sex Education, but in particular the "That's My Vagina" scene, you will love this book. And finally, I have 2 poetry books to talk to you about. The first of those is Electric Arches by Eve L. Ewing. This is a combination of poetry and prose. It has fantastical elements to it, it has whimsical elements to it, it has Afrofuturism, which is a term that I've only learned recently. And through all of these different styles and genres, the poet is really exploring black girlhood and black womanhood. Because of that, I think there were a lot of elements of this collection that I just didn't get or didn't connect to, and that's completely fine. They're not for me. I do get the sense that this collection is very much for black girls and black women, and while I didn't connect to everything in this book or understand everything that was going on in this book, I could definitely appreciate how beautifully written it was, and definitely got the sense that every word was chosen so precisely and so carefully. And I would definitely be interested in reading more of this poet's work. And the final book I have to talk to you guys about is Bantam by Jackie Kay. Jackie Kay is one of my favourite poets of all time. These poems are all connected by a sense of a fighting spirit. And this fighting spirit is depicted in a lot of different ways. We are looking at motherhood and the strength of that. We are looking at the strength that you have to have in relationships. We're looking at the strength of a child. We are looking at the strength of soldiers and men and women affected by war. We are looking at the fighting spirit of activists. And one of my favourite poems in this book is looking back at her parents' activism and how people kind of look at them like they're just kind of 2 old people. But they have this rich personal history of fighting for political and social change. There's also a poem in this collection about Arthur Wharton, who was the first black professional footballer, and that was probably one of my favourite poems in the collection as well. I will always read anything that Jackie Kay writes. She is one of my absolute favourite poets, and I love how she uses sound effects and also Scottish dialect in her poems as well. So yeah, really highly recommend this one. one. So there we have it. This is everything that I read this month, plus a few books that I read digitally. Do leave me a comment down below and let me know if you've read any of these books. Tell me what you thought of them. I would love to have a chat with you guys, or let me know what you're currently reading. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you in my next video.